everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Hi, my name is Alan Schneider. I'm here with MidWestOne Bank, and we've got a group here that I'll introduce in just a second. But tonight's presentation is avoiding financial exploitation and computer scams. And really what that boils down to is we want to help protect you, protect your finances, protect your information, and we've got some information that we want to pass along to you to help you do that. So we'll get into introductions here. There we go. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm Alan Schneider. We've also got Cindy Schrock here, Kevin Warner, we've got Christy Felberg back there. And last but not least, we've got Jim Cantrell, who's also the president of the board here at Oakmont. So to start out with, I just wanted to go through an agenda for tonight's presentation. We will begin with what is financial exploitation and some common financial scams. And from there, we'll give you some tips to protect yourself against those. And then the second half of our presentation, we'll get into what is cybersecurity. Some of you may have heard that term, some of you may not have. We'll help explain that. We'll also go over some common computer scams, and there will be some overlap because some of these start on the computer or maybe end on the computer. And then again, some tips to protect yourself from computer scams as well. And then finally, we'll have time at the end for questions. We had quite a few questions when we did this at the Oakmont East campus, so definitely feel free to let us know if we can answer any of those for you. And if questions come up along the way, feel free to raise your hand, and we can try to address those as well. So to get started, what is financial exploitation? It's also known as elder financial abuse when it happens to those 60 and above. And according to the American Bankers Association, it's a crime that deprives older adults of their resources and ultimately their independence. The FBI puts out an elder fraud report every year, so I just wanted to share some statistics from the 2021 report. And these statistics are for people 60 and older. These fraud schemes can get anybody of any age. But these statistics are just for that 60 and older age group. So in 2021, there are over 92,000 victims of these types of crimes. And that accounted for $1.7 billion in losses, and that was a 74% increase in losses from the 2020 report. On average, over $18,000 was lost per victim, and over 3,000 of those victims lost more than $100,000. So these are pretty impactful crimes. In Iowa, a little closer to home, luckily we kind of factor in the bottom half of these crimes, but they still happen here. There are about 550 victims, which put us in the 35th ranking in all states. 10.3 million in losses. Again, over 18,000 in losses per victim on average. And 17.2 victims per 100,000 population, which is pretty good. We were toward the bottom. It was a little bit more than 50 because the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, I think, were included as well. But we were very close to the bottom in terms of the number of victims per 100,000 people. So that's a positive, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. I wanted to quickly go over where this type of abuse or where these types of scams can come from. So they can be over the internet. Telephone and mail scams are common too. You see it with home repair contractors taking advantage of people. It can happen with family members and caregivers, friends and acquaintances, or even financial advisors or other professionals. So it's really an across the board, a wide spectrum of where these types of scams can come from. So we want to make sure we keep you on your toes here. What we're going to go over tonight is some of the more common scams that we see and some of the more common ones that were listed in that FBI Elder Fraud Report. At the top of the list is tech support fraud, and we'll get into the details on each of these later on, but about 15% of those scams in that report were tech support fraud or similar types of fraud. Identity theft is another very common one. Confidence fraud and romance scams, government impersonations. impersonating government entities, lottery, sweepstakes, and inheritance scams, and then finally investment scams. So we'll start out with the tech support scam. Like I mentioned, this was one of the most common ones that you'll see. And in a typical scenario, it may start with you being on your computer, you click on something on a web page, and all of a sudden you get a little pop-up window on your computer saying that maybe you've got a virus or something along those lines. A phone number can be displayed, or in some cases you might even receive a call without calling out to anybody, and that caller is claiming to be from an IT support group to help you clean up your computer. They may claim that there are viruses or malware on your computer and it needs to be resolved right away, and typically they'll ask for remote access to your computer. And that means they're able to take control of the computer from over the internet, and they'll tell you that they're trying to fix your problem for you while you wait or while you watch what they're doing. Once they have that remote access, a lot of times they will use that to get access to your online banking accounts. They'll bring it up, they'll have you enter in your username and password, or maybe they'll ask you to enter in your username and password, or they'll ask you what the password is. Once they have that access, they will make it appear that they accidentally refunded you too much money for their services. So they'll say, their service was $40, maybe they did a $40,000 transfer or credit to one of your accounts, and they need to have that money refunded. A lot of times they'll try to tug on your heartstrings. They'll be in tears claiming they're going to get fired because of this mistake, and they need your help to immediately wire transfer those funds or somehow get those funds back to them. And one of the key things as kind of a red flag here is the scammer may ask you to lie to your banker when you're going to make that transaction. They may come up with a story that you need to tell them if they're asking questions about why you want to do that wire transfer or why you want to do that transaction. Did we have any? I think we had an example of this as well. Let Cindy cover that.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. I love the statistics, and they're kind of alarming, but I think sometimes real life stories hit us home, and we can understand through stories and real life happenings. So I work in the retail side of the bank, which at the Rochester Avenue office on the east side of Iowa City, and unfortunately we see scams every week. And one of the situations I wanted to share with you tonight so we could all learn involved a client sending $20,000 in 2 envelopes of cash to California. Fraud is hard. I think it's a tough one. We see that fraudsters are professionals and they're slick. They wear you down and they try to outsmart you. I tell my customers that, we've had doctors, we've had professors, we've had attorneys, retired professionals. They've all fallen for scams. So trying to give people grace, it's just something that we want to try to work at. So last week when the client came in asking for cash, she was convinced. Someone had called her on the phone, and she said, well, I gave them my username. They kept asking for it. I gave them my password. We went into online banking, and they showed me that they were putting money into my account. I watched it. They showed me. I saw the transfer happen. She was just so sure. So we questioned her multiple times. And she was also sort of threatened by the fraudsters that she would be in trouble if she didn't send money to them. So there was a lot going on at play. So the 2 times she came and got the cash. On the 3rd time when she came in, we called her daughter, who's also on the account with her. And it was kind of a tense situation. She said, what, my mom's there? And she can't drive. Did she get an Uber? And we said, yeah, she did. Well, how much money is she asking for? And we gave her the amount. She said, oh no, this is not legitimate. So she initially refused to tell her kids because she was ashamed. She was scared, and after 2 nights of agonizing and stressing and loss of sleep, this had happened. So unfortunately, we feel like she still feels like what she was promised was true. So we had to take away her online banking. We took away her rights, and she has to get her computer completely cleaned by a professional before she can enter our online banking system again. We had to close all of her accounts with changing account numbers, all her direct deposits, all her automatics that she had set up. So it was quite a hassle for her because she's going to have to notify everybody. Longer ago, your banker could help you and call them and say, oh, Mrs. Smith has a new number, here it is. But they won't even talk to bankers anymore because of identity theft and fraud. So, you know, many times we're able to thwart these cases, asking good questions, and it actually angers our clients. We know it's your money, but sometimes it angers our clients, and we're really trying to help and do what we can to prevent losses. We've thwarted a lot of withdrawals with cash. We've even thwarted some wires, even international wires. At first, we're seen as pestering bankers, nosy Nellies asking questions, and none of it should be our business. It's their money, and you know, just let me be, I know what I'm doing. So it truly is your money on deposit, and we hope to help you. I have a great staff, and we ask lots of questions, and we can't completely stop these situations from happening, especially if they're following the script that the fraudsters want you, they're talking and saying word for word what the fraudsters want them to say. But what we talk about is slow down. Think about this before you act. Talk to a trusted friend. Talk to your siblings, your daughter, your son, whomever, before you go to Western Union, before you go to the Target parking lot and start scratching off gift cards and saying those numbers to somebody. Just think about it. You may thwart that crime. And the biggest takeaway too is let time elapse. They want to get you to do things fast and not think about it. And if you let time elapse and you kind of collect yourself and think about it, does this make sense? Is what I'm doing reasonable? Why am I doing this? You know, kind of question. You're probably, the more time that elapses, probably more thought come to you that this probably isn't a good thing to do. So we know as bankers, you know that you're not supposed to give any information out over the phone, like your social security number and relating to your bank account and stuff like that. Hang up, call your banker, and especially if they say, well, this is your bank calling. Hang up, call your banker. Hopefully you know who your banker is and you have a relationship with them. We want to be your trusted advisors. Relationships are very important to us at MidWestOne Bank, and we want to know your voice, and we want to talk to you and work through this. So this was just one thing, and we'll get into another one, but I don't want to scare you, but it's a reality, it's happening. And you know, on the east side of Iowa City, it happened, $20,000. This family, it was a tough situation all the way around, and they gave their mother grace and, you know, said, it's okay, but they sure would have appreciated if she would have slowed down and just thought about it. So.
Thank you, Cindy. That was an excellent example, and like she said, it's always good to hear those real-life examples and learn from those. Our next common scam is identity theft. I'm sure you've all heard about this. The scammer uses stolen information to commit fraud or obtain credit in someone else's name. And a lot of times that information can be obtained by social engineering. What social engineering is interactions that allow the criminal to gain more information about you, learn more about your finances, and then use that information to perpetuate the identity theft or the fraud. And I think Kevin's got an example to speak about here.
Hi everybody, I'm Kevin Werner, and my identity theft story is about me. I was at my desk on a Friday afternoon over a year ago, and our payroll department called and said that someone had filed an unemployment claim under my name, social security number, had my home address, and she wanted me to know that she already had replied that it was fraudulent, but again, just to get that information to me. And I really appreciate relationships, and relationships matter. So in other words, she didn't wait, she took action and let me know. On my part now, someone has my name, social security number, address, they had my bank. I thought it was interesting, I'd worked at the bank for 22 years, and yet this fraudster, of course not knowing all about this, did attempt to obtain some unemployment benefits. So what I did was I contacted Iowa Workforce Development and let them know that it was a fraudulent claim, and they did lock that case for me. But there's more to it than just that. So Cindy talked about that, taking that time, but I would also encourage you to take some action. I remember as a kid, my parents would say, what'd you know, when'd you know it, and what'd you do about it? So I knew about this fraudulent claim, so I went ahead and I looked at the credit bureaus. You can get 3 free credit bureaus per year, depending on which bureau you're going to use. So there's 3 major bureaus, and we have information on this. But the first thing I did was I pulled my Equifax report. So what you want to do with that, someone has my information, did someone apply for credit? Did something not look right on that report? Well, fortunately, everything looked fine. So at that point, you've got 2 choices. One, you can put a credit freeze or lock, and that's what I did. We're not using credit, we're not getting cards, we're not moving, so locking your credit basically means if someone would come to the bank and you'd want to get a car loan, and I would try to get a credit report on you, it wouldn't work. It's locked. We can't make a credit decision, so then we would not be able to grant that credit card or make that car loan. So that really, we think, slows down or stops that activity. We do have some clients, though, that use credit regularly. So in other words, I have to get my credit. If you lock your credit, you can unlock it. We have to get the right bureau and the information. So again, you have to unlock it with your key or password, and we could pull it and you could lock it again. But some folks don't want to do that. They want to put a bureau alert. So you can put a fraud alert on all 3 bureaus. And what that means is you come in and get credit. So I pull your credit report and we see a bureau alert. I may have been a victim of identity theft, and there's a phone number. So you can do a short-term bureau alert, that's 90 days. Long-term bureau alert, that's 7 years. But again, what you're doing is you're making sure that identification's on that credit report. So somebody's going to look at that and say, okay, I've got a credit card application, and Alan Schneider says, I need to call this number. So I call it, and Alan said, yep, I made an application for credit with you. And then we would document that. We'd put that in our file, because an examiner would look at that and review it. What we find in our footprint, sometimes folks have landlines, and you move. So you have this bureau alert on, and it says, I need to call your landline, and yet that landline doesn't work. So what we have to do at that point is that application would technically be denied because we have information on the bureau we can't verify. So we go back to the client and say, we can't do this, there's a bureau alert, so that person would go back and work the system to update that information. So my point with that piece is, please make sure addresses and phone numbers are updated, and to protect that good credit that you've worked hard for. Those relationships, like Cindy had mentioned, when I got that call, it is unsettling. Someone has my name and social security number. I called my wife. What would you advise your clients? What would you do? So again, to take the action. We also think it's important to review your bank statements, credit card statements, those kinds of things, just to make sure there isn't something that's unusual on that statement, on that credit card billing. Talk to your banker, talk to your financial advisor, talk to that trusted person. When something doesn't feel right, something doesn't look right, go ahead, talk to that person and say, gosh, could you just look at this with me? Am I really understanding that? I've been fortunate, I haven't had any issues, but I do think working in the industry for as long as I have, I do shred my documents. I don't provide my social security number, phone number, email, those types of things. So my point is, I don't know how they got my information, and I wasn't alone, but there are ways that folks get this, and we just want to make sure you've got the proper tools to protect yourself.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And I think that example shows that even the best and the brightest among us can be victims of identity theft. Moving on, one of the other common ones that we see and is seen throughout the industry are romance scams. You may or may not have heard of these. The scammer adopts a fake online identity to gain a victim's affection or confidence. This might be through email, it might be through social networking, Facebook and the like, and they'll spend some time getting to know you, kind of letting you think you're getting to know them, and then that just builds a foundation for them to commit fraud, to utilize you and your finances to get what they want. Many times the scammer will say that they're in the military or engaged in projects outside the U.S. to avoid meeting in person, so that can be a red flag as well. And then that also gives them a little bit of cover when they want to have money wired overseas or money sent overseas in some form. And kind of a similar scam to this, it's really in the same family as a grandparent scam. So an imposter will call you or call someone pretending to be a grandchild who's in trouble. Maybe they were in a car accident or something like that and they need help. A lot of times the scammer will be crying, making it hard to recognize the voice. You might think that reasonably this is a grandchild or a loved one. And then they will plead for you not to tell the parents. They need you to wire the money, but don't tell the parents because they don't want to upset them or that they don't want to anger them. So I know we see that pretty regularly. Do we have an example of that? Okay.
How many of you have had the grandparent scam? Oh, look at all of them. And you knew how to handle it. Hang up, click. That's good, that's good. They're gonna keep working and see who the gullible one is, and they're gonna get that one. So another real life fraud thing that happened, and yours probably sounded a lot like this, but the voice was a little odd, and he said, "Oh, Grandma, I have a cold, so my voice sounds weird. This is your grandson." She said, "Jared, is that you?" Yeah, this is Jared, giving it away right away. "Grandma, I was on the way to the doctor, and my phone fell on the floor, and when I reached to pick it up, I rear-ended the car in front of me. A police officer came and cited me, Grandma, for negligence and using a cell phone while driving. I'm in jail, Grandma. Don't tell Mom or Dad. I need your help. Give them cash, Grandma. Call this case number, write it down, blah, 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 blah. And the officer will give you instructions." Well, a long scam ensued, strung out over 5 hours. She was completely bamboozled and followed the slick thief's words. She was told to lie about what she needed the money for, and so when she came in the bank and we asked her lots of questions, she lied to us. She acted normal. We knew her. She was a longtime client of ours. It was a large request of cash, and the service associate really questioned her. She even offered a cashier's check or other solutions for her. She even had her wait, and she asked another service associate, "Something doesn't seem quite right. I don't think this is quite right." We had to fill out cash security forms and extra security procedures, which we have to do. She still wanted the money. So after the employee got the second opinion, we said, there's been a lot of fraud lately. We're just trying to protect you. We don't want you to fall victim to this. Is a lot of money. And so she said, "Well, my family's helping me remodel the house, and they've been so wonderful. I want to pay them in cash." That was the lie she was told to tell. And after a while, she was frustrated with all of our questions, and she insisted on getting $18,000 in cash from her account. "It's my money. I know what I'm doing. I have it in my savings account." Hours later, she gave $18,000 to a courier boy who knocked on her door at her home and then fled in the dark. The story continues, but won't likely have a happy ending. The police are involved, but her loss most likely will never be recovered. Here again, the takeaways are slow down. Ask yourself, is this reasonable? I would even call the grandson and say, I would probably call the grandson's parents, your son or daughter, and just say, hey, ask a neighbor or a friend, does this sound real? With all the hands going up in the room, I bet you if someone asked you in confidence as a good friend, you'd say, oh honey, no, that's a scam, don't do it. So you need to slow down and don't be embarrassed to ask for help. These people are slick. They know what they're doing. They want to rush you. They want you to not think and slow down. Ask questions. If you find yourself in one of these situations, they'll attempt to bully you and keep going and going, and she felt bullied. So don't forget to ask questions to your friends and family, your trusted advisor, your bankers, or whomever. And like I said, call that grandson, call their parents, and even folks that you know and you trust and will take advice from. So that was another sad example.
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, so you're seeing a common theme here. I think with a lot of these scams, they are trying to get you in a sense of urgency where you need to act now. And like Cindy says, sometimes it's best to just slow down and take it at your own pace and really think through the situation before you act. Now we're getting into some of the scams that we don't see quite as often, but they can still be fairly effective, so we wanted to make sure we covered those quickly as well. I mentioned the government impersonation scams at the start. A lot of times what you see is IRS scams. The scammer or the imposter will claim to be an IRS agent either through a phone call or over an email. They'll tell their victims that they owe past due taxes and they must be paid promptly through, I had examples here of a preloaded debit card or wire transfer, which you don't see the IRS asking for those forms of payment, so that's kind of a red flag. And then again, to get that sense of urgency, if the victim refuses, they will threaten them with arrest. If you don't pay your tax bill, we will send you to jail. Alternatively, they might tell the victim that they have a tax refund coming, and in order to get that refund, they need to provide them with some private information that can then be used for identity theft or fraud. Anything? Any example? This one too?
So our team talked about this one a little bit, and the takeaway we had is the IRS will send you something in the U.S. mail. If there's an issue or a problem, you'll get something in the U.S. mail, a bill or something to respond to that correspondence. Like Alan said, you would not get an email or a phone call or social media or a text. That's that phishing place where we're trying to get information from your bank account or information on you. But our team did talk a lot about we would have something in the mail when you respond by check or something like that. Not a collection agency, not something like that, but you would have written correspondence in the U.S. mail for that IRS issue. So just want to make sure about that.
Thank you. All right, a couple more we wanted to cover. Lottery and sweepstakes scams can be common. In this case, or in this situation, a victim receives it could be a telephone call, an email, or a letter that congratulates them on winning a lottery or some type of drawing or sweepstakes, and many times they haven't entered, so that's a red flag right there. Usually you have to enter to win. The scammer will ask the winner for some type of upfront payment or processing fee to be able to receive their winnings. So again, that's the red flag. If you're having to make some type of payment up front, most likely it's not legitimate. We have an example of this one too, or keep moving? All right. The last one to cover was investment scams. So these involve some type of sale or even a purported sale of financial instruments. The red flag here is if they're promising no risk or guaranteed returns, it's probably too good to be true. And some examples of those are an advance fee fraud, where they're collecting a fee up front, again, or some type of pyramid or Ponzi scheme can fall into this category as well. So to kind of wrap up this section, we wanted to go over tips for avoiding telephone or email scams in particular, then we'll get into a few more tips. We've covered a lot of these already in some of our stories, and again, that's the best way to illustrate some of these, but what we wanted to have you take away from this is don't give others remote access to your computer. There may be some situations where that's okay, but especially if somebody is calling you or you get something popping up on your computer out of the blue, you want to try to avoid that. Again, be wary of those upfront fees or requests in the form of wire transfers or payment cards. Those are common ways for criminals or scammers to try to get your funds where it's less likely that that money can be returned to you. Be suspicious of any high-pressure tactics. If they're trying to get you to act urgently, again, slow down, take the time to verify. If it's a call, hang up, use a number for somebody that you know and trust to try to verify what's going on. And I guess I went into the next item there, but if a caller claims to be from a company you know, hang up and call back. And then finally, as we've mentioned a couple different times here, don't allow somebody to isolate you or discourage you from talking to others. If they give you a story to tell others, some type of made-up situation, when they start to ask questions, again, that's a red flag and probably one of your first clues that the situation is not legitimate. Some other ways to avoid financial exploitation, just kind of from a preparedness standpoint, plan ahead to protect your assets and ensure your wishes are followed. Talk to a trusted advisor about the best options for you in advance. I think we've mentioned this as well. If you've got banking information that you're looking to get rid of, shred that. So that may include receipts, bank statements, unused credit card offers, or other credit card information. And I think we have offered to take that information. So if you don't have a way to shred that yourself, when we come in for our monthly banking visits, bring that to Kevin or Cindy or whoever is here at the time, and they can take that back to the bank for you and make sure that that's securely disposed of. Carefully choose a trustworthy person to act as your agent in your estate planning matters or financial matters. Storing your checkbook, financial records, and other sensitive information in a secure location is an important part as well. If you secure that information, it's less likely to fall into the wrong hands. And then as Kevin mentioned, there are some things that you can do to check on your credit history, to make sure that nobody is using your name for fraudulent purposes. So order copies of your credit report. You can get them once a year for free. If you need it more often than that, you'll typically have to pay for it, but that helps ensure that there are no mistakes or no fraud showing up on your credit report, and that's one of the ways that you can identify some of this activity before it gets too far along. A few others, don't give personal information to somebody over the phone unless you initiated the call. So if somebody's just calling you out of the blue, be suspicious of that. And then you want to try to make sure that the other person is a trusted individual. So they may say they're from MidWestOne Bank or from some other company or institution. And if that's the case, if you didn't initiate the call to them, it's best to hang up and call somebody you trust with that company. Don't pay fees or taxes to collect those winnings like we talked about. That typically is not the way those types of things work. Never rush into a financial decision. We said it many times, and that's one of the things that you really want to take away from this is these types of decisions should happen at your pace, not with somebody pressuring you to make a quick decision or take quick action. Consult with a financial advisor or attorney before signing any documents you don't understand. So if somebody's handing you a piece of paper and again trying to get you to act right away, take your time to make sure you understand what you're signing or what you're getting into. And then get to know your banker or other trusted individuals, build a relationship with the people who handle your finances. And as Cindy said, we train our staff to ask questions to make sure they understand these situations because they're so common. We want to make sure that you are thinking through what's going on and you understand that there is the potential for these transactions to be fraudulent. Anything else we wanted to cover here? All right. What to do if somebody you know is a victim? Just real quickly, first off, talk to a trusted family member. Or pastor in here. I think this was coming from some of those ABA materials. Talk to others that you trust, attorney, doctor, banker. Just get their input and their assistance with the issue. And then locally, you can contact the Johnson County Department of Human Services, and we provide the number there, or local law enforcement. this type of activity is definitely something that's on law enforcement's radar, and they would be happy to help you sort out a situation if you think something's just not right. All right, so that is what we had for the fraud and scamming, identity theft portion of the program. We wanted to quickly also get into cybersecurity basics. And what is cybersecurity is the first question. Well, it's a lot of the electronic and digital pieces of your lives. It's the accounts that you might have online. It's your social media accounts. It's your finances, everything like that. Any electronic records, and cybersecurity is how you protect that. So the steps that we can take to make sure that that electronic information is only given out or known by people who need that information. And to think about the scope of this problem, you want to think about all the different ways that you use the internet today, and many of you may use it for a lot of the things that we're showing here. So you may use it for your finances. You may have accounts or information, electronic information about your medical records. A lot of people will use email and social media and other ways to communicate. You get your news from the internet a lot of times now, and shopping as well is something that's pretty common, where you're passing financial information, especially back and forth with others. And there's a lot of different ways as well. So the scope of the cybersecurity problem is a pretty major one. There's information all over the place, and we just want to give you a few tips to help you protect yourself when you're using some of those functions or putting that information out there. So we already kind of covered this a little bit with the grandparent scam, but one of the things I like to ask when doing presentations like this is, have any of you, or does somebody you know been the victim, or maybe even been involved in some type of identity theft or fraud? So from a show of hands, anybody who's been, and we're not looking to single anybody out here, so if you know of others, that's fine too, but just where you've seen these types of scams in action, it's good to know that we've got some people out there that are seeing those, and that's pretty common with what we're seeing with a lot of our customers as well. So some things that you could do then, we've shown that these things are touching our customers, that they are happening in our area. Some things that you can do to help protect yourself from a cybersecurity or a computer standpoint. One of the things that we look at is how you secure your devices. So the things that you use, like iPads or computers, laptops, to connect to the internet, we want to make sure those are secure. That's step number one. And some ways that we can do this are, number one, install security software. And that's mostly for PCs or Windows type devices. You want to make sure that you've got some software on there that will detect viruses and malware. That's the first step you can take. And then the next thing is keeping those devices up to date. So you've got the security software on there, but things change pretty regularly. Criminals are using new threats and new ways to get access to your information on a regular basis. The companies that put out those devices and put out the software that you use are also trying to keep up as well. So they put security updates out pretty regularly. And one of the things that you can do to make sure your devices are the most secure is to install those updates when they come out, keep things up to date. And usually this is a pretty easy process. More and more with computers, Windows computers and iPads and things like that, there's a regular process for the updates, and you can even set up those devices to automatically update when new software comes out. Keep the devices in your possession. When you have physical access to those, it's harder for somebody else to get access. If I were to leave my computer or laptop laying around, it's more likely that somebody can get information off of that, or just take the device and use whatever information they might find on there. And then again, we've already covered this, but beware of those computer repair scams. So if somebody can get access to your device through that remote access method, they've got a lot of information about you, or a lot of information they can use for fraudulent purposes. So once you've got your device secured, the next thing that you want to think about is securing your passwords. Many of you probably have multiple accounts, multiple passwords. There's talk that eventually we will have other forms for identifying you, authenticating you to some of those systems that you use, but for now, passwords are the best that we've got in most cases. So when you select a password, use a strong password if you can, and usually longer passwords mean stronger. Obviously, they're harder to remember, but there are ways that you can help manage that as well. You want to use unique passwords if you can for each online account as well. So maybe you have, let's just say you've got 5 or 10 different accounts out there. You might have a Facebook account, an online banking account, an email account. If you use the same password for each one of those accounts, if somebody finds out one of those, and let's say they have access to your email, if the username and password is the same across those other systems, they may also have access to your finances or to your Facebook account or things like that. So it's best to use one password for one system and not use the same password across all. And then just keep those passwords private. So in some of these scams, you might get a call from somebody claiming to be from MidWestOne, and they say they need to help you with your account, or we just had a system update and we need to know what your password is. We will not ask you for your password. So if somebody's calling you and asking you for that information, again, that's a situation where you probably want to hang up and call back to confirm exactly what's going on. Another way that you can secure yourself is safe use of social media. This is mainly just controlling what information you put out there about yourself. So be careful what you share, and think about the ways that that information may be used for social engineering purposes or identity theft purposes. Definitely don't share personal information. I think most of us would know this, common sense, but just think about the information that you're putting out there and whether or not that could potentially do you harm. And then one of the most critical things with social media, as we mentioned, people will set up those accounts, make you think they're one person, but actually be somebody different. So know who you're communicating with. If you get a new friend request or somebody emails you out of the blue, don't assume that it's who they say they are. Make sure that you take some steps to verify that, or definitely don't give them information until you know that you're communicating with somebody you trust. Safe use of your email account, again, worth mentioning. Know who you're communicating with in email, and if it's an unexpected message especially, don't just assume that this is somebody that you know or somebody that can be trusted. Avoid links or attachments, especially in those unexpected messages. Those are the things that can end up putting malicious software or viruses on your computer when you're clicking on website links or attachments that you weren't expecting. So if you get something like that out of the blue, I'm not saying that every unexpected email is something to worry about, but it's just one of those things that that should get you to slow down and think a little bit before you automatically click on it or open it up. And then again, like across all the scams, as we mentioned, beware and be cautious about any messages that convey a sense of urgency or say you need to act right now. Very rarely is there a case where you can't slow down and try to verify before you take some action. And finally, like within the lottery scams and things like that, we've all heard if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So just stop and think when you're in situations like that. Securing your bank information, similarly to some of the other things we've talked about, don't give out your personal information over the phone or email, your banking information especially, because that can be used for fraud. Assure online sites are legitimate before providing account or credit card information, and I'll just give a little bit more information on this because it's not real clear from that statement there, but one of the things that is fairly common in getting access to online accounts or bank accounts is someone will send you an email, a phishing email. Have many of you heard that term? So the email is fraudulent. They make it look like it's coming from MidWestOne Bank. They may have a link within the email that actually takes you to a web page that looks like it's the MidWestOne Bank page or some other page that you're familiar with, but they can recreate that page, and it's actually providing information to them. So when you go to that site from the link in the email and put in your username and password, they're actually collecting that information, and then they'll go out to the site, enter your username and password, and have access to your information there. kind of scary stuff, but it happens pretty frequently. So if you get an email with a link in it and you're not exactly sure if that's legitimate or not, your best bet is to go into your internet browser and open up the page that you're familiar with versus clicking on that link. And then, as we mentioned before, check your statements, check your credit report regularly to make sure that there's nothing unexpected showing up on those reports and documents. Anything else that you guys wanted to add? I think we're just about done here and ready for your questions. So, just to sum everything up, I think we've mentioned this multiple times and hopefully gotten the point across. The best thing you can do to protect yourself is just stop, think, verify what's going on when you get in some of these situations where things just don't feel right. You see some red flags. People are asking you for payments over wire transfer, through prepaid cards. They're asking you to come in and get them cash and tell your banker that it's for a vacation or something like that. When you get in those situations, identify those red flags and ask for help if you need it. Ask questions. Definitely don't be embarrassed to ask for help, because as Cindy mentioned at the start, this can happen to anybody. This happens to people of all walks of life, of all ages, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about when you get in one of these situations, because the people that do this kind of thing, they do it for a living. This is how they make their living. This is how they make their money, and they're good at it. They are constantly evolving what they do. What I'm telling you tonight, hopefully some of the key things aren't going to change in identifying these scams, but the scams themselves will change over time. If we come here next year, we'll probably have some new stories to tell you, unfortunately. So if you get in a situation like this, ask for help and don't be embarrassed about it. That's what we're here for, is to help you out and try to make sure that your money is safe, that you're safe, and that your information is safe. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm sure there are some questions out there, so anybody want more information or have any questions? Yep, go ahead.
What about entering your information when you're purchasing something online? Is that pretty safe?
In most cases, it is. Oh, yep, I'm sorry. So the question was, what about when you go online, you're shopping online, and you enter your financial information there, your credit card information, or maybe just your personal information and address? The main thing there is making sure that you're going through a trusted site. So kind of like I talked about, if you get an email that takes you to that page that asks for your username and password and your credit card information and that type of thing, it's a little more risky. If you've got a favorite set up for Amazon, for example, and you're going to that page and entering your credit card information, it's fairly secure, but you just want to make sure that you're on the actual page, because it will happen where they'll direct you to a site that looks like what you're expecting, but isn't exactly that. But yep, great question, thank you. Yep.
In Kevin's story, he mentioned, I think it was 4 places he called, but I didn't get them. One sounded like Iowa Workforce Development. I didn't get the names of them.
Yep, just 1 second.
Thank you. So the question about my identity theft were the places that I called. The reason I called Iowa Workforce Development, that's who had the fraudulent claim. So that's the reason I started there. So for example, if it was a different company, you'd want to call there. Because they had my name and social security number and information, I did contact the bank, my bank, MidWestOne, to tell them that someone has that information. So we actually, it's our duty to protect customer information, but there's also this other piece that someone has my information, so we actually would put an extra alert.
A what?
An alert, so another form of just making sure we're knowing who we're talking with. And then it was the credit bureaus. So again, after someone has that information, there's a chance you might try to get a credit card. So the credit bureaus would say, is something open a month or 2 months in the past that I didn't do? So you could either lock the credit bureau or put that fraud alert on the credit bureau. Go ahead.
The bank and other vendors offer credit cards. So for example, there's a MidWestOne credit card. If there's a question on an expenditure, is it MidWestOne or the
So the question was, if there's an expenditure on like a credit card, who would I contact? So for example, if it's the MidWestOne, you'd contact us. And then we would say, this was something charged at ABC store. And maybe you said, I didn't do that. But since we're the servicer, you'd want to start with us.
That's really the question.
Yeah.
If there's a bank intermediary, are they the ones who would manage that, or the people to contact?
Yeah, you'd start with us. Yep, please. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but your system doesn't really do that. If I were to call and this happened to me, I called the bank and they said, no, dial the 800 number on the back of the card, which I did and reached Shazam,
Okay.
then not MidWestOne.
Yeah. Sorry. So that's a debit card. So there's a credit card where we would hold the credit card, but we also have debit cards. So Shazam would be the processor through the credit card. Yeah. So they would also, like, for example, stop a fraudulent transaction or place some type of temporary block on the card. But yeah, that's a debit card type transaction. Yeah.
It's a really good question, because sometimes a debit card looks like a credit card. But we have a system in place where, like, if you're traveling, we actually have a company hired that looks at what you're purchasing. And they may say, ooh, this is in Ohio. He's just done something in Iowa City. That's a flag. So we call it Falcon Alert. And so the number that we have on the computer for you, we may call you and say, were you in Ohio at the Arby's restaurant spending $45? No, that wasn't me. So then we're going to shut down your card because someone has used that card. So you're not liable, which is the good thing. The bank is liable for that. You would come into the bank and say, that was not me, and we would get you a new card. So there's a lot of hassles with that because people don't like to get a new card, but we have that second layer of protection for the bank that we have hired this company to work for us to thwart fraud. So, and those are debit cards attached to your checking account, not credit cards where you have a monthly bill. Okay, good question though. Thank you.
Could you explain the difference between a debit card and a credit card?
The question is, what's the difference between a debit card and a credit card? A debit card is attached to your checking account, and every time you make a transaction, a purchase, it pulls the money out of your checking account. A credit card is, you can make a purchase, but it's going to accumulate those purchases, and at the end of the month, you're going to get a bill for all those purchases. Nothing to do with your credit card. It's a loan. It's an actual loan that you pay. If you don't pay your whole credit card balance off, you have to pay some interest on that. So it's very different. Debit is attached to your checking account. Credit card is a credit that you actually get a $5,000, $2,000, $500 credit line that you can use. So good question for clarity. In the back?
The one thing you haven't brought up is that you shouldn't put your debit card online. You should put your credit card instead. What's your advice on that?
That's a good question. I'll have the tech specialist.
So,
We all have different opinions.
yeah, I think what you might hear is that putting your credit card information out there is less likely to immediately impact you. So if that card is attached to your account, there's the possibility if somebody gets their hands on that, they can debit money from your account right away. Whereas with a credit card, your limit could come into play, or the credit company will try to resolve those transactions before you have to pay for them. So there is a little bit of difference between the two in how they're processed. I think the main thing is just to, again, like we said before, if you're putting that information out online, make sure that it's with a trusted source or that you know where you're using that. Is that helpful?
I would add, from a security perspective, you're not liable if there's a debit card unless you don't tell us about it. But for example, if someone would go to a store and use your debit card, you would come into the bank and say, I didn't spend $30 here. And so we fill out fraud paperwork saying it was an unauthorized use. Same is true with the credit card company. You're not liable there either. The bank takes the hit on the debit card, and the credit card company takes the hit on the credit.
Ma'am, for me, it's the relationship though. So if I have my debit card and Cindy Schrock's my banker, I know who I can call if I have a problem. In other words, I sometimes that calling an 800 number or something, it can work, but for me, that debit card, I could call Cindy and then she could help me get that reissued, get that stopped. And I think that relationship piece for the bank would be important.
There's one other layer on a debit card that helps. So we're seeing, like if you're traveling down south in gas stations and your debit card may not work if you put it in as credit, but that second layer of knowing your PIN number, we say put your 4-digit code in, it may then authorize you to get gas, whereas a credit card might not work. So we usually say if there are troubles, try that one, because they, oh, well, she knows her code and she's also there. So it doesn't guarantee it, but it's just one more layer of security.
There are commercial services available for IT services and also for, well, let's deal with the IT services first. And when you deal with them, they take control of your computer to work out the problem. Do you have any comments about those services and how trustworthy they are?
Well, yeah, I think that's the key, is that you go through some type of process to understand whether they're trustworthy or not. So when we talk about remote access and not allowing people to have remote access to your computer, there are certain situations where you want that. Like you said, maybe you're having trouble with your computer and you want somebody to fix it, and there are companies that definitely do that remotely. You know, my recommendation would be, if it was me, I would check out that company. I would maybe try to check with my friends and get some personal resources to know that it's somebody that's trustworthy before just allowing them access, you know, without any type of verification. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
I've used the service for 5 years.
Well, then I would say they're probably pretty trustworthy.
Yeah, and it's out of Salt Lake City, and
Yeah.
you know, they take. When I was at university, I had IT service,
Yep.
and I didn't need anything. Now, without being employed any longer, and I still do a lot of work on the computer. If there's a problem, I need to take care of it now, not 24 hours from now.
Yep, absolutely. And there are situations like that, and the best advice that I can give you is just trying to make sure that you vet those companies out or vet those services out, just like you would any other service. So, you know, you want to make sure that you take your car to a repair shop that's reputable and that type of thing. So these would be the same type of situations.
I've been getting a lot of messages from like Microsoft stating that there's been a problem with your account and we need to fix it. Please contact this number and we'll start the process. Well, unfortunately I did.
Yeah.
And they were so convincing. It was unbelievable how much they knew about me and what they wanted me to do to fix this account.
Yep.
And finally, I just said, hey, wait a while. And I slammed the phone down. Within 5 minutes, I get a call from whoever I was dealing with and said,
red flags in that story for sure. Yeah, yep. And that's
That was
not
a good lesson.
Yep.
And I like you said, I was embarrassed about it. I didn't want to tell my wife about it, but I eventually did.
Yep, they can be very convincing, and that, yeah, it happens all the time, unfortunately.
Isn't he aware that Oklahoma has wonderful technical service?
Do they? Okay. Well, I wasn't aware of that either. All right.
I know. They're very good.
Yep.
I need it now, not 10 minutes from now.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Got another question in the back there.
I wanted to go back to your response about fraudulent purchases, and that you say the bank would call and ask if I made this purchase in Ohio. I would be suspicious of that, of your call. Simply because that seems to be the most common phone scam right now.
Yep. Absolutely.
This is Amazon. We're checking to make sure you made this $1,400 purchase delivered to this address in Miami.
Yeah, and that is a great point.
I think you never want to trust the voice you hear calling you. You always want to call back.
Yeah, so in those situations, you want to be very selective about the information that you give out. So I think in the situations where that call would be placed on our behalf by the Falcon Fraud Group that Cindy was talking about, they will typically ask you if that was your transaction or not and leave it at that. I don't think they get into any information. They won't ask you for your card number and that type of thing. So just be selective about the information that you give out in that situation. Or there are other situations where somebody will call you for that type of thing, but they shouldn't be asking for personal information. They shouldn't need your account number. They shouldn't need your credit card number, that type of thing, to perform those services.
Usually with that kind of a situation, they'll send you an email, and then you'll call them, like your credit card.
It could be that, yeah. Yep.
That's pretty secure, right?
Yep. Yeah. Each service is a little bit
Provided
different.
they don't give you the number.
Yeah.
The important thing here is, it's one thing if you originate the call, and it's an entirely different thing if you receive a call purportedly from, say, Apple,
Yep.
or Microsoft.
Yep.
Neither of those companies will ever call you and say there's a problem with your computer.
Nope. Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yep.
You can't do that.
Yep. Yeah. If you weren't expecting it, be a little cautious about it. It's just like if somebody comes knocking at your door and you weren't expecting them, you're not going to just invite them in the house and let them have the run of the place. You'll be a little bit more cautious about that if it's something that was unexpected. All right.
I have had many messages on my phone that the Grubhub driver has left their food at my front door. I don't have a front door, so I don't know.
That's, yeah.
How do they get my phone number? I've been checking my credit cards, and I'm not being charged for anything.
Yeah.
I just hope there's some unhappy people out there whose meal is on their front door and dog.
Well, yeah, it's possible that could be a mistake, I suppose, that somebody's got a number similar to yours. Yeah. Do they have your name associated with it too?
No.
Then, or so yeah, it could just be somebody. And a lot of these scams too, they'll just put information out there. They won't necessarily know that the number's associated with you, but they figure if they send it to enough numbers, you know, let's say they send it to 1,000 people, 1 or 2 of them will fall for it. So they can kind of operate their scams that way as well.
Yeah, that's called a robocall.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Kind of.
Let's call it a day. I'm getting tired.
Oh, we are. Yeah, it is at 8:05. And yeah, and I guess we'll be around here if anybody has any other questions and wants to come up. And thank you very much for being here tonight.